Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining me for another video on bullet journaling and homeschool logs. Today's video is going to be a little bit different from some of the ones that I've done in the past. I'm going to start by giving a few overall tips regarding how to make bullet journaling work for you in keeping a homeschool log. And I'm going to show you my completed journals from last year. That was the 2020 to 21 school year. And then I'm going to show you what I learned from that, what I liked from that, and what I'll be changing for the upcoming school year. That's 21 to 22. So let's get started. My very first piece of advice is do what works. I kind of feel like this is my mantra for everything in life. If bullet journaling works for you, use it. If it doesn't work for you, then don't use it. I personally have found that using pen and paper is a better system for me and for my kids in keeping track of things, in having something that they can easily access, and in keeping us engaged. Bullet journaling in and of itself is not a one-size-fits-all system. I've managed to every year tweak things a little bit to make them work better for me, but you might choose to use some of these ideas and incorporate your own. If that's what works for you, go for it. Second piece of advice, use quality materials. This is really important. If you use this every day, like I do, this is something that's going to undergo a certain amount of wear and tear. You don't want to be frustrated by a book that's falling apart, by pages that have ink bleeding through them, or by pens that just don't write the way you want them to. I'll put a link in the description below to a video I made on bullet journal paper quality. My favorite is Dingbats, but this year I decided to make a switch to Rhodia, which also has really good paper quality. Last year, I let my kids choose their colors, and one of them chose this orange journal from Dingbats, and the other one chose this blue one because he liked the color, and we found it on Amazon, I think, from Wordsworth and Black. And honestly, I hated the paper quality of this. So lesson learned, which is why we switched to Rhodia this year, which has more color choices, which my kids liked. I tend to keep things fairly minimalist with just a few pens. I like using things like microns. I use a mono twin pen for labeling the sides of their notebooks with their name and the homeschool year. Use something that you know works and is good quality. If you're not sure what the best quality pens are, my advice, go to a local art shop that is run by people who know what they're talking about and understand what quality materials are. Talk to them. Ask them for recommendations on the best quality pens. Again, you're going to be using this all year long. It needs to withstand wear and tear, and it also needs to be something that could be a keepsake for you in the future. Quality materials does not necessarily equal expensive. More on that later. Third piece of advice, leave room for margins. You'll find bullet journals have plenty of room. You don't need to squish everything in order to make it all fit. I always find that I have extra pages left at the end of the year. So leave some room. It will look nicer, it will be less cluttered, and it will promote a bit more of a sense of order and peace in the general tone of the way that it looks. This is something I didn't do very well last year, but I'm planning to do better on it this year. Fourth and final before we dig in, adapt. If you try something and it doesn't work, there's no rule that says you can't change it. So you can change mid-year, you can finish out the year and try it differently next year. Again, this kind of relates to point number 2. Do what works for you. So let's jump in and take a look. Here on my desk you can see last year's journals and this year's journals side by side. The first page you'll see when you open up the journal is a page that gives their name and their contact information, which I'm going to skip for now for obvious reasons. The first thing we see at the beginning is the table of contents. So I've got the pages listed here, school calendar and attendance, curriculum overview. So here's the page that each subject appears on, and here is the subject that we can take a look at in a few minutes. And then we had daily logs. In the state of Pennsylvania, we are required to keep attendance and prove that at least 180 days of learning happened during the school year. I do this by writing out my calendars, circling each day on which we did school, and writing what those days were. July, we had days 1 through 23. August, we had days 22 through 44, and so on. We always find ourselves with far more than the 180-day minimum requirement. I keep my field trip log at the beginning of the book. This is because in a normal school year, we find ourselves taking lots of field trips. For obvious reasons, 2020 to 21 was not a normal school year, so we're hoping that it will be a more complete list next time around. And as I flip through the book, you can see that I have the subject at the top and a list of books and or resources we used for each thing. Family reading, we did quite a bit of that this year, and to make this work, I put a little star next to everything for which we used a logo reading guide, and I put an arrow next to the books that we did a Zoom homeschool book club with. Here's an example of a curriculum page. We list the subject at the top. I list the books that we use for that subject, and later on in the daily logs, I keep a list of what we did on different days. Just a quick look at the other journal from last year, very similar to the one we've already seen. Slight differences. I decided to space this more out, and you'll see that in a few minutes on this year's books. One thing I changed this year was to add a category of miscellaneous/electives. So this is for those topics, those subjects that don't necessarily fit into a standard category. For example, one of my children did a The Great Courses class in computer programming. He did Duolingo Swedish lessons, and he got merit badges for various things in Scouts. One thing that I did differently this year, and I definitely plan to continue it, is I incorporated some color on the sides of the pages. This helps me keep track of what month we are in, so you can see that as we move through the different months, the colors change, and I think it looks nice. Here's a typical example of how my daily logs looked for this past year. Some things I like about what I did, again, besides the color, just keeping things very organized. The things I don't like, it's far too crowded. I'm planning on taking more space this year. Another thing that I'm planning to do differently is to not write down every single thing that we do on a daily basis. I'll show you how I handle it in the next books, but you'll see every day I wrote down piano practice and reading and things that we just always do every day, and that gets a bit tedious. So I'll show you when I show you this year's books how I changed that. One quick word about keeping track when life gets tough. I encountered a health challenge during part of the year, and honestly, I was giving the kids schoolwork to do on a daily basis, but I did not keep track of exactly what we did on every day. These things happen. So what did I do? I made a general list and said, on these dates, this is how we handled school, and it keeps track. I kept attendance at the beginning of the book, and that worked just fine. So now it's time to take a look at this year's books. I kept their names and the school year on the side. I did write their contact information on the inside, but you'll see right off the bat that the index is already different. I've left spaces between the lines. I just like the look of this better. It looks cleaner, it looks neater, and it looks more peaceful to me. We will be doing the attendance and school calendar in the same way that we did it last year. This is a change for this year. I've made pages for daily responsibilities and weekly responsibilities. This saves me the trouble of having to write it down on every single school day. So these are things that they do every school day, regardless of what else we cover on that day. And these are things that they will be doing every single week. This is going to save me time later on. Once again, I put a subject at the top of each page. You can decide at the beginning of the year that you want to write down all the books you plan to use, or you can fill them in as you go through the year. Do whatever works for you. Now I'm going to show you something that I did a little bit differently this year. Because I'm a working mom, because I teach at a university outside the home, I sometimes need to have things lined up for my children to do when I'm not home, and they need to know what they're responsible for on any given day. So this year we're incorporating Grammar Planet and Wordly Wise along with teaching textbooks, which we've done previously. And I've planned out the year basically by listing the day and listing which unit is going to be covered on that day and whether it's video and practice or a test. You'll see that I've done something similar for teaching textbooks here. Day 1, lesson 1. By the time we get to day 9, it's quiz 1. And I kept a list of this for the entire year. So when the time comes to write it in the daily log, I'll just write TT 17 and he'll know that on that day he needs to do lesson 16. You'll see that I've done something similar for Wordly Wise. Day 1, lesson 1, activity 1 through 6. Day 26, lesson 9, activity 7 through 12. Day 31 is going to be a midterm test. So on his daily log, I'll write WW 31 and he'll know that's the day to do the midterm test. Our first day of school starts tomorrow, so I've started writing out what the daily log will be. Grammar Planet, day 1. Wordly Wise, day 1. Teaching textbook, day 1. Anything that changes a lot, such as science or history or civics, I'll keep a log of it specifically under each day. I'd like to wrap up with a few final words about quality of materials and price tag. You'll see here that I created a pen test page at the back of my book. This helps me to know how well my pens will work with my book, whether the printing bleeds through. Rhodia is a pretty good quality book, so it doesn't tend to do that. You'll see which pens tend to smear if you turn the pages too quickly. But these are the pens that I've used so far in these books, and they seem to be working really well. For the colors, in the past, I've used these Zebra mild liners, and they work really beautifully. However, if that's a little out of your price range, Crayola Super Tips work really well. So that's what I used most of this past year when I put those colors to separate the different months. And I may be using them again this year. They worked really well for me. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful.